live via satellite, broadcasting the gospel around the world to over 170 nations, including North America, to Asia, into the Middle East, into Europe, and to Africa. Welcome to TCT Alive. Our faithful prayer partners are standing by to take your calls during the next hour as we lift up the name of Jesus. Now, let's welcome your TCT Alive hosts.
Welcome to TCT Alive. That's Total Christian Television Alive. We are broadcasting the gospel 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some 170 different nations, and we welcome you to today's broadcast. We have an exciting broadcast. My name is Pastor David Longobardo. I am the senior pastor at Christ Covenant Church right here in Greensboro, North Carolina, and we're in the beautiful studios of Channel 61 today. Joining me on the set here is Don Brown. Don is a very fascinating man. You're going to get to know him over the next hour. He was and is a son, a husband, a father, a retired military veteran, an author, a lawyer. Don has many hats, and you're going to learn about all of them during the next hour. In addition to Don, we have a great musical group, Rejoice, that's going to bring us some great music. To open our broadcast, listen to these words written by the Apostle Paul to Timothy, his son in the Lord. He said, "You therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. You therefore must endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ." The Apostle Paul told Timothy that the Christian life is not a playground, it's a battleground. And it is a joy for me to welcome Don Brown on the broadcast today. Don, a pleasure.
Thank you, David.
God bless you.
Thank you so much.
I read that because your journey began in the little city of Plymouth, North Carolina, Don.
That's right, the great metropolitan area, 100 miles south of Norfolk. So that's exactly right.
Population?
Probably 4,000.
There you go.
I'm not sure how reliable the census is at any given point in time.
You grew up in Plymouth, North Carolina in a Christian family, I believe.
Correct.
So you're a spiritual son of a Christian man.
I do have a great Christian heritage. I had a grandmother who was a tremendous prayer warrior on both sides of the family, so I'm very, very blessed. Nothing I did is very blessed to have been born to great spiritual prayer warriors like that.
Don, I read in your bio, and you have a great bio. I read in your bio that at a very young age, your father, who you loved with all of your heart, developed severe throat cancer. Tell our audience what happened.
That's correct. It's my grandfather. And really, David, I was about 4 years old. And it's one of the very first things I ever remember. And I remember, back in those days, there was no FDA. There was no filter on the cigarettes. And my grandfather worked out in the farms. Mm-hmm. And so what they would do, they'd go into the tobacco fields. And eastern North Carolina was the king of tobacco during those days. They roll the cigarettes and just smoke them. Mm-hmm. And without any filter, without anything, not knowing the adverse health consequences of that. And so about the time I first started to remember things, the very first memories I have were the assassination of President Kennedy, and then about a year later this happened. And I remember my grandfather's voice began to go away. And he was treated at, of course, Duke Medical Center. I'm a Carolina guy, but I do respect Duke. They've got one of the best medical schools in the world.
Thank you very much. I'm a Duke man. Go right ahead.
Go. We'll get along just fine here, but anything's possible. But he was given about 6 months to live, and they were giving something called Cobalt at the time, and he was really faced with a tough predicament. His voice had gone. They talked about the possibility of giving one of these voice box things, and he elected not to do that. And somehow my grandmother found out about a lady named Catherine Kuhlman up in Pittsburgh. And they drove there to Pittsburgh. My grandfather's voice had gone. It went from speaking normally just to whispering. I remember this vividly. And they went to Pittsburgh, never really been out of eastern North Carolina. It was a wonderful story. And came back, and my grandmother said that Catherine Kuhlman had met my grandfather and prayed for him. And she told him that not not everyone she prays for is healed. In fact, many are not. And she doesn't understand why some are and some aren't. But she believed that he would be. And a few days later, a few weeks later, my grandfather's voice started to come back. And it came back, it was like a little squeak. It was really interesting. I remember this very, very vividly. And my grandma was looking around, my mother was looking around, and everyone was surprised about that. And then within another week or two, it began to normalize a bit. And then I remember they went back to Duke, and the doctors there were flabbergasted because the cancer was gone. He never smoked another cigarette after that.
Wow. He knew the Lord had touched him.
Absolutely. No doubt
Your
about
journey went from not only that experience and you accepting Christ at a very young age yourself, but your journey took you to a great school. You mentioned it.
Thank you very
Your
much.
undergrad work was done at?
University of North Carolina. That's
You're
correct.
a Tar Heel.
That's correct.
There you go. But after that, what happened? Where did you go?
Well, my senior year, I decided I was a political science major, and with a liberal arts degree, sometimes we banter about a bit, and I thought about possibly going to the seminary. Decided I wanted to go into the Navy, and I'd always been fascinated by the Navy. Eastern North Carolina is down near Norfolk, and which is our largest naval base, and so I took the officer candidate school exam and passed the exam. You may remember about '82, though, we were in a recession.
That's right.
And at the time, even though I passed the exam, they were only accepting technical degrees, engineers. If I'd been over at NC State and been an engineering major, I'd have been in good shape. So was not picked up for that, got into law school, and then applied for the JAG program and was picked up for the JAG program.
Now, everybody knows about JAG because they watch the series that's on television, but define JAG for somebody out there who may not know what it means.
Well, the funny thing about it is, David, nobody knew what JAG was
until the program.
Right, after I got it, which is fine with me.
That's right.
JAG stands for Judge Advocate General, and basically it simply means a lawyer on active duty as an officer in the military. Each of the branches have them. We've seen the show, so you know the Navy and the Marine Corps do. Well,
right.
The Coast Guard, the Army, and the Air Force all have JAG corps. So it's simply a lawyer on active duty in the United States military.
So you ended up going to what law school?
Went to Campbell.
Great school.
God bless Bowie's Creek, North Carolina, in Harnett County. That's exactly right.
That's right. And so from there, tell us how you ended up going into the Navy and into the JAG Corps.
Well, it's interesting because, as I told you a moment ago, I'd taken the OCS test around 82, 83, started law school 83, 84, and knew since the Lord did not open up the doors for me to go to regular OCS, probably a good thing. I probably would have killed myself if I'd been driving an airplane or something. Applied for the JAG program my first year of law school. And the recruiter came in and he said, I see you took the OCS test. We can have you in flight school in 3 weeks. And this is, here I am, my first year of law school. And I said, well, let me see how my grades are. And I decided to stick with the JAG program, and that's sort of how it started. They commission you, and you stay in the reserves before you graduate, and then go on active duty once you've passed the bar.
Tell us a little bit about your years in the JAG Corps and in your permanent duty station in Washington, D.C.
Washington was my final duty station. People have always asked me, why the Navy as opposed to the Army? Sort of like, as I said earlier, I have had a fascination with the Navy. I've been around boats. My grandfather had a boat. We fished at Pamlico and the Albemarle Sounds. We'd go up to the Norfolk area. And at the time, I wanted to litigate. And the best two options were the Army and the Navy because you had more courts-martial going on in those branches. Then it came down to, well, what are your interests? Well, you're decked out very handsomely in blue today. I thought the Navy's uniforms looked better. And the duty stations also, to me, were more appealing. And so my first duty station actually was in San Diego, but I was able exactly. But I was able to spend time in Charleston, South Carolina. We had the Navy's third largest base was there. Of course, most of my time was in San Diego. Spent time in Newport, Rhode Island, beautiful town, and also then at the Pentagon, which is my final duty station.
Now, during your years in serving active military, you had a variety of experiences, I'm sure, but one of the things I'm fascinated by, and one of the primary reasons that we have the joy of having you today, is that post your military career, you have developed a writing career. And Zondervan, which is one of the largest publishers of Christian book materials in the world, is publishing and has been publishing a series of books that you have written under the banner of the Navy Justice series. Tell us how all that came about.
Well, that's a very good question. Zondervan is the largest publisher of Bibles in the world, as I understand it, and of course known for some very great works of nonfiction, such as The Purpose-Filled Life. But a lot of Christian publishing houses have come to see what the power of fiction can be to help alter and to improve society. And at the same time, the converse is true. Bad fiction, whether it's via movies or the theater or whatever, can have the tendency to desensitize us. But the way this came about is that, well, this is an interesting story. It started during a Carolina basketball game. And had a friend who...
one in which Duke was beating them?
No, that doesn't happen anymore, you know.
Go ahead.
That is ancient history. That is historical
Get spiritual,
fiction.
go ahead.
Exactly. But it is that. But it was... there was a friend in Charlotte who, she and her husband are great people. They're supporters of the arts. And, you know, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, if you can imagine all the Christmas parties you have to go through. And as a pastor, I'm sure it makes it even worse. You just get tired of going to these Christmas parties. So this lady had something called an Epiphany party. Now, you know, you live and learn. And I'm not Episcopalian, so I had to figure out when is the Epiphany. So I believe that Epiphany is the 7th of January, if I'm not mistaken. That night, Carolina was playing Wake Forest. And Matt Doherty was the coach of the Tar Heels at the time, first year. And Wake Forest is ranked 2 or 3 in the country. And so at this party, all of the participants were mingling up on the main deck, or the main floor. Navy people call floors decks. The main deck of the house. Down in the basement, the Carolina Wake game was on. So I would go down. In fact, I stayed in the basement. I figured they won't miss me. Watch the game, then come up during the commercial, say hello, back and forth. And afterwards, I felt kind of bad that I had not been as social as maybe I should have been, and wrote her a note. All I remember about the note was I quoted Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. She wrote back and said, you should write a book. And she wrote a note back, and she said, this is the best thank you note I've ever seen, you should write a book. And that is how it got started.
You mean prior to that, you never had a thought of...
Never had a thought of it. And I had an old laptop that I bought off Amazon. You probably have a laptop. You remember the old laptops that did not have even the CD-ROM. Little floppies here, floppies there. So I went home the next day and started to write a historical fiction novel. And worked on this thing for about 2 to 3 months. And then saw an ad in the Charlotte World, which is a Christian newspaper published in Charlotte, about Christian Writers Conferences at Bridgecrest, the Blue Ridge Christian Writers Conference. And somebody said, well, you should go. So I went, and one thing led to another, and that's sort of how it got started. But it started watching a basketball game. So it's amazing how the Lord works these things out.
Well, I'm going to hold up. This was, I believe, your first book in the series, the Navy Justice series. It was called Treason, this was your first book. But subsequent to the publishing of this book, there's now been Hostage and Defiance. And then there's one that's getting ready to come out that's called The Black Sea Affair. Tell us a little bit about these books. They're very intriguing. Treason, Hostage and Defiance, Black Sea Affair. Tell us the thrust of the books, Don.
The novels, especially Treason and Hostage, the first 2 novels, look at the question, what if? What if there were radical Islamic sleeper cell infiltration into the United States military? We saw what happened with radical sleeper cell infiltration into civilian flight schools. And so the novels consider that question. And in the first novel, Treason, the book assumes that there is radical Islamic infiltration into the United States Navy Chaplain Corps. And as a result of that infiltration, bad things begin to happen. And these imams are recruiting sailors who begin to adopt the radical Islamic philosophy, and you begin to see various crimes committed. And they wound up getting prosecuted for treason by a young JAG officer by the name of Zach Brewer, who is assigned this court-martial, which blows into what my publisher Zondervan calls the court-martial of the century, because the imams, through some very well-connected financial supporters, are able to hire the best defense lawyer in the world, Wells Levinson. So it's Wells Levinson versus Zach Brewer in the court-martial of the century. So this fellow, this young JAG officer, is in over his head, and it is essentially a modern David versus Goliath story.
When most of our viewers would be familiar with the JAG series that's on television, when you compare that with your own experience, your reality experience,
right,
and the fictional or novel work that you do in your writing, how does the reality of being a JAG officer compare with what we see on television or what's even in your books? The premise you just laid out is actually a very plausible scenario in terms of its potential.
I believe it is a plausible and a realistic scenario, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to write realistic scenarios and trying to do so with a storyline that is biblical worldview based. Maybe I'll talk about that a little bit in a second.
C.S. Lewisist.
There you go.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm no intellectual like
Sure,
C.S. Lewis,
sure,
but that's the idea.
Right.
I get this question all the time: how realistic is the show? Well, the truth is, I've only watched it 2 or 3 times, and basically that's out of curiosity because I was once a JAG. But the truth is, it's a bit Hollywoodish. I mean, you don't find too many JAG officers flying an F-14 Tomcat. I'd kill myself. I mean, it's a good thing I didn't go to flight school. But there was a movie that came out a few years ago, A Few Good Men, with Jack Nicholson,
Yes.
Demi Moore, and Tom Cruise, and that was actually based upon an actual court-martial that had taken place in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And the court-martial scenes are about 80% realistic there. That movie is far more realistic in my judgment than the television show.
The television series.
Yeah.
What kind of response are you getting to your material in terms of books like Treason and the other books that you've written?
We're very blessed to have gotten good response. It's amazing because I've gotten emails from all over the world, from India, from Indonesia. It's just wild, you know, when somebody, I had an email from a Christian school in India about 2 or 3 months ago. Someone had read the novel, Treason, and wanted a copy of Treason. So I was able to send all 3 to them. The person wrote back and thanked me. It's been really very, very encouraging.
You mentioned your lead character is Zach Brewer.
That's right.
And where does he come from? Where did you adopt? Is he the assimilation of someone that you might know?
Well, you know, they asked Tom Clancy if he was Jack Ryan, you know, and I guess that's kind of fun to do. Am I Zach Brewer? I don't know about that, but he is a graduate of the University of North Carolina, and he's not the brightest bulb on a Christmas tree. He's a good trial lawyer.
Very realistic, actually. No, go ahead.
Yeah, there you go again. We got basketball season starting real soon. We'll get you in football before then. But anyway, he is just an average guy. He's a Christian guy who doesn't have any axes to grind. He's a very talented litigator. Who has gone through the Naval Justice School in Newport, Rhode Island. That's where the Navy trains its lawyers, a place called the Naval Justice School. And at the Naval Justice School, he kind of cruises through and finishes halfway up top of the class. But he wins the Trial Advocacy Award there, and he beats his chief rival, Lieutenant Diane Kolcernian, who is the valedictorian of the Naval Justice School and can't stand the fact that this guy who's sort of come see, come si is taking the Trial Advocacy Award off of him. They both wind up in San Diego together, trying a rape case against one another before this court-martial of the century occurs. So that's who Zach is, just an average guy, Christian guy that's thrown into the fiery furnace a bit. We'll see how he reacts to it.
Where did your concepts come from? Did you have any experiences when you were serving that approximated the reality of what you write about?
Oh yes, the 3 novels that you've mentioned, Treason, Hostage, and Defiance, all contain court-martial scenes. Treason contains 2. There is the it's a highly political rape trial that takes place there, and also then the trial for treason. And the portrayals of these courts-martial I've tried to make them as realistic as possible. And I think they're very realistic. We use the military rules of evidence. We see the judges reacting to certain ways. And so yes, I was involved in a very high-profile rape prosecution when I was a prosecutor in San Diego. Mm-hmm. And some of my experiences there are drawn upon and are in the novel.
Outstanding. We are going to go to music in just about a minute or so, but I want to explore something with you when we come back, and that is, you laid out a premise that is laid out in your book, Treason, and that is that some imams infiltrate the chaplaincy program of the United States military, and that becomes challenged legally. And we want to talk a little bit more about that and what transpires in your book. And what I really want to explore is the constitutionality of that, the legal grounds for that lawsuit, and how that comes out in your book and your perspective on that as it relates to, we're talking about issues that are impacting our culture right now. Okay. And I think they're very relevant, and we want to explore that together when we come back after music. Thank you for piquing our interest, and you stand by because you're going to enjoy hearing the rest of Don Brown's perspective, not only from his book, but what's going on in our country, legally, constitutionally, culturally right now. His perspective will be one that will be a blessing to you. Coming right now is a great group. They're called Rejoice, and they're going to minister to you in song, a song called Story of My Life. Sit back and enjoy it. Rejoice.
Tale of Bartimaeus spread all across the land. Some could not believe what had happened to this man. Skeptics gathered round him. Was it truth or just a lie? They could hear it in his voice. They could see it in his eyes.
Let me tell you a little story all about God's grace and glory. I was blind, I could not see, but the good Lord made a change in me. I'll testify and praise Him for what He's done is so amazing. It's a miracle, my friend, I saw the light. And that's the story of my life, yeah.
Now I'm no Bartimaeus, I've had troubles of my own. Lost in this old world, just a sinner all alone. Oh, but then I looked to heaven, and He opened up my eyes. Jesus saved my soul, turned a new page in my life.
Let me tell you a little story all about God's grace and glory. I was blind, I could not see, but the good Lord made a change in me. I'll testify and praise Him for what He's done is so amazing. It's a miracle, my friend, I saw the light. That's the story of my life. Every chapter, every line is covered with His mercy. It's too good to keep inside. I can't keep it inside, inside. This is my story. This is my song. Praising my Savior all the day long, all the day long. Let me tell you a little story. It's all about God's grace and glory. I was blind, I could not see, but the good Lord made a change in me. I'll testify and praise Him
Amen. Thank you, ladies. That's Rejoice. They'll be back in just a few moments with some other great music. On set with us is Don Brown. He is an attorney. He is a retired military naval officer. He is a graduate of Campbell University's law school, and he is an author. Zondervan has been publishing what they call the Navy Justice Series. And the first book in the series that Don has written is called Treason. And we were exploring some of the material of this book just a few moments ago. And one of the premises is that a group of Islamic terrorists infiltrate the Navy and become chaplains in the military. And as a result of that, it creates this kind of a radical scenario in the military that becomes challenged in the courts. Give us some insight into this in your book, and how realistic and what is the potential of that happening in reality?
Thank you. I think, David, the potential is bone-chilling. Part of the problem is that there is no way to separate what I call radical Islam, the folks that would drive an airplane into the World Trade Center, versus what I call vanilla milkshake Islam. And I don't for a minute believe that most Islamic people in America are out to, blow up a building. Most have never even read the Quran, frankly. But the problem is that there's no way to discern the difference. And in the novel, we start with the supposition that a sleeper cell group has decided to begin to infiltrate the military via Islamic chaplains, and that their goal there is to begin to surreptitiously recruit seamen and Marines. This is a Navy novel, so in the novel, one chaplain winds up in San Diego, another is at the Marine Corps base in Camp Pendleton, and the third is at the Oceana Naval Air Station in Virginia Beach. And so they begin to recruit seamen into the radical Islamic sect, and you have all sorts of things going on there. There's an assassination attempt against the Israeli ambassador. An F-18 blows up in the sky. And so this is what happens. So I think it's a realistic scenario. The issue is, how do you deal with it? How do you stop it? And there are no easy solutions.
And what would be the constitutional issues here? Don, when I was in the military, and I served in the Army, I was, unlike yourself, I'm a little older. I was drafted into the military. We had chaplains. We had Protestant chaplains. We had Roman Catholic chaplains. We had Jewish rabbis that were chaplains.
That's correct.
In your book, their chaplaincy, these gentlemen that have infiltrated into the chaplaincy service of the military, becomes challenged.
That's correct.
What would be the constitutionality of this?
I believe, first of all, thank you for your service, David. The Chaplain Corps was initiated basically by General George Washington back in 1777 in New York City. And up until very, very recently, the military chaplain corps has consisted only of Protestant chaplain, Catholic, and Jewish chaplain.
That's right.
Interestingly enough, the gentleman who initiated the Islamic chaplaincy was indicted, and NBC correspondent Lisa Myers did a piece on this